That was a long breakdown for a game that I'm very excited about. Very. You hear my voice crack there? That's how excited I am. College football has never been better. Interest has never been higher. Believe that we are at the dawn of the golden age of college football. It was an epic day of college football. It was one of those days where you fall in love with the sport all over again. What's up, everybody? How we doing? It's college football week 2. Here we go. We got a monster week ahead of us. Michigan and Texas. That's where we'll be for Big Noon Saturday. Welcome into the program. I'm Joel Klatt, and this show is presented by Hampton by Hilton. We thank them, as always, for their support of our little program right here. We're going to get into some picks, but before that, remember, wherever you're listening, go ahead and rate, review the show. If you are not subscribed on YouTube, you better get over there because we've got some really cool content that is being rolled out this week. We got a little film study on the Telestrator coming out exclusively to YouTube, so you're going to have to be there and subscribed and get in the comments below down there as well. And we appreciate everybody joining in. Big week for the show. And it has resonated. So thank you, college football fans. I am deeply in your debt for supporting our show here. Now in our third fall. Is this already our third fall? That's wild. That's actually really wild. I didn't realize time was going that fast. It's pick day. It's preview day for week 2, and we've got some big games. And here's the thing. You guys understand. This is not a betting show, so I'm not sitting here and cherry picking the lines that I like. I look at the biggest games as I see them in college football for that week, and I talk about them, and I'm going to give you a score based on the way that I think that the game is going to play out. And based on those scores and those picks a week ago, I'm just saying the last week we did 6 games, and I was 5-1 against the spread. So if you wanted to share it with your friends, you probably should, or you can just hoard it to yourself, but I would appreciate it if you shared it with your friends. Let's get to the previews, and we start with my game. Of course, I won't be making a pick in this game, but Texas travels to Michigan. Number 3, Texas at number 10, Michigan. Big Noon Kickoff is going to be there for a 3-hour show. Make sure you're tuned in at 9 a.m. Eastern. And then Gus, Jenny, and I will bring you Big Noon Saturday as Texas and Michigan clash there in the Big House. Just a second meeting ever. Remember, they played that really awesome classic Rose Bowl game back in 2004. Vince Young and Texas come back late in that game. They win. He scores in the exact same corner of the end zone that he would score in the next year against USC. It was really a precursor and a jumping off point to that national championship year for Texas. Vince ran wild, 192 in that game of 4 tutties. How we doing? How we doing, Vince Young? By the way, just real quick, because I know Texas fans will listen to this. Our team at Colorado played the Vince Young team in 04 that went on to win the Rose Bowl, and I thought that they were good. The next year, we had to play them twice in their national championship year, once in the regular season, once in the Big 12 championship game. And I never got to play against Reggie Bush on the same field. I shared a field with him with the New Orleans Saints in our camps and as rookies, but Vince Young's the best player I ever played against, that I ever saw live. And I saw, for instance, I saw Adrian Peterson as a freshman at OU, and I thought he was incredible. But man, Vince Young was, he was the best football player I've ever seen. I digress. Let's get into this matchup. It is a great matchup because I think styles make matchups, and in this one, we have this incredible matchup with a strong Texas offensive line against what I would consider to be one of the best defensive lines in the country. So now you've got this Texas offensive line, and you got guys like Kelvin Banks and Hayden Connor and Jake Majors and DJ Campbell who can rotate at times with Cole Hudson. And these guys are phenomenal. By the way, they bring in a first-year starter in Cameron Williams who might have played better than all of them in the first week. Granted, it was against Colorado State, but they played really well up front. And here's the thing that you need to know. They returned 4 starters, and those 4 starters also started 2 years ago. So basically, they're like a 3-year starting offensive line. This is as experienced a group as you will find, in particular at the top level. And you couple that with all the experience that you have at quarterback with Quinn Ewers and all the games that he's started. And what do you have? Veteran talent. And you know how I feel about veteran talent in the modern era of college football. This Texas team has it. This roster is exceptional. We didn't get a chance to talk at depth about Texas in the preseason. I knew we would have this week and this specific episode to talk about it. But I got to tell you, Steve Sarkisian is building something incredibly special. While Georgia and Ohio State in the offseason kind of sucked all the oxygen out of college football in terms of the rosters that they had, in particular Ohio State with who came back and the veteran talent, you look up now and you start studying Texas, and this is as good as any roster in the country. Steve Sarkisian has done an incredible job in Austin, Texas, and he has built a strong, foundationally tough program that's really good at the line of scrimmage. That was proven last year when they went to Tuscaloosa and won that game against Alabama. And he's built it in the vein of the team that he was the coordinator of at Alabama, because they've got speed on the outside. Now, they're not ultimately experienced on the outside. They've got a lot of new faces out there on the outside, but guys that can fly. So I'm talking about Isaiah Bond, the transfer from Alabama, Matthew Golden, Silas Bolden, all of those guys transfer in. What do they bring? Speed. They've got young stars, five-star kids, Ryan Wingo, sophomore Jonte Cook. These guys can all run, and they will stress Michigan's secondary. They will stress them. And this game plan, I can't wait to see it, because you know Sark is always planning something that is creative and aggressive for these big non-conference matchups. That's what we saw 2 years ago against Alabama. That's what we saw last year against Alabama, even on the road, those shots that he was taking down the field. And inevitably, that's what we'll see against Michigan on Saturday in the Big House. And I cannot wait for it. I think Ewers is an exceptional player, and he is in a lot of ways overlooked. Two reasons. Georgia and Carson Beck take a lot of that air, in the conversation out from an SEC perspective. And let's face it, Ewers' backup is the most talked about backup in college football in Arch Manning. And yet this guy has kind of matured and grown up to a point where I don't think it bothers him all that much. And he's exceptional. If he just continues to play the way that he's playing, he will absolutely be in New York for the Heisman Trophy ceremony, and he might win it. That's how good of a player Ewers is. The concern for Texas coming into the season was that they lost C.J. Baxter, their running back, to injury in the preseason. And yeah, that's not great, because he was a really good player and a solid part of what they do every single down, like kind of their every down back. Now, having said that, Jaden Blue, who's a junior from Houston, this guy, he's explosive, got a lot of time last year. And then they've got this Jarrett Gibson freshman who, I got to tell you, I watch him on film and I'm like, oh, yeah. There is your every down back as this thing goes on. There is your guy, kind of a slashing style. He's 5'10", 205 pounds. He's very talented. Both of those guys, Jaden Blue and Jarrett Gibson, both got double-digit carries in that first game against Colorado State. But it's really the foundation that I'm most impressed with. Texas always has talent. What did they not have for about a decade, I would say? Toughness at the line of scrimmage, and they have that. I think this is one of, if not the best offensive line in the country because of their experience, all the big games that they've played in particular on the road. That win last year against Alabama is going to pay huge dividends for them. Their matchup against Michigan, and by the way, I'm going very much in depth on this game because I think it deserves it. Their matchup against Michigan is phenomenal because Michigan's interior defensive line that has to take on that offensive line is as good or better than any in the country, in particular in the interior. I'm talking about Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Now, Rayshon Benny is also rotating in there, but these two guys, man, last year they were the best defensive tackles as a tandem, I thought, in the country. All due respect to what Texas had with guys like Devondre Sweat up front. These two guys were disruptive. Part of what made them so great was the fact that they didn't have to play every down. One of the most unspoken about keys to last year's successful run for Michigan was their depth on defense. I used to talk to Jesse Minter, their former defensive coordinator, now with obviously Jim with the Chargers, I used to talk to him all the time about their depth. And he used to talk to me about like it wasn't really the schematics that were stopping people, but their freshness that was stopping people, their ability to play and rotate guys up front. In fact, to give you an example, like last year, Mason Graham, for example, he was probably last year their best defensive tackle, although Kenneth Grant kind of came on late. And even in that rotation, Mason Graham was playing max 30 snaps a game. Well, now you can be fresh. You see 60 snaps as a defense, your tackle is playing 50% of those. He gives you 30 great efforts. So he can be at his peak every single time he's on the field. I don't know if they have the same rotation. I certainly don't think that they have the depth that they did a year ago. And, they had Chris Jenkins a year ago. They had all of these guys. They had more players to rotate. So what I'll be looking for is how good and how strong they are, I think is the better word, in the second half in particular. But that matchup, folks, I'm telling you, I'm going to be hitting on it a bunch in the broadcast because we don't often talk about offensive line, defensive line matchup, but this one is fantastic. Kenneth Grant might turn into the guy that could be, when he goes into the NFL, I'm just going to say it now, and I know he's a young player. He's just a junior, 6'3", about 340 pounds. I think Kenneth Grant at some point in his career as a football player is going to be the best defensive tackle in the National Football League. I think he's got that type of talent. So, like, that's who we're going to be seeing on defense for Michigan. And then in that back end, they're going to have to deal with the speed. Now, remember, Rod Moore, who was a safety that was coming back for them, tore his ACL in the offseason. So he's out. Keon Sabb, he transferred to Alabama. So they're a little thin at safety. That's a concern, in particular with what Sark likes to do, taking shots down the middle of the field. Will Johnson is going to have to play the best game of his life. I firmly believe that. I think that Will Johnson needs another interception. We saw the pick six last week against Fresno State. Will Johnson has to be the best corner in college football on Saturday because of the pressure and the speed that Texas is going to inevitably throw at Michigan's defense. Now, Michigan's defense last week, people were saying like, well, they were susceptible against the pass. I actually viewed it as more of a complementary style of defense from Wink Martindale, their defensive coordinator, where he understood that all he needed to do was not give up big plays to Fresno State, let the defensive line eat, and they were going to be just fine, and that's exactly what ended up happening. Great matchup right there. I can't wait to see that. Now, on the flip side, now you get Texas's defense against Michigan's offense, and Michigan's offense is the one, at least after the first week, that has some questions. Let's be fair. I do think that this is more of a one quarterback system than a two quarterback system. I know I talked about it yesterday with Brady, and I touched on this. When you actually go back and watch the film, what you see is that they used Alex Orji sparingly. This was really Davis Warren's team. And Orji came in a small amount of packages in order to be effective in the quarterback run game. They did have him throw the touchdown pass on the first series. Again, that's a run pass option. You're trying to put stress and conflict on the defense, and he was able to make the right read and the throw. Later in the game, they had him throw, and he throws it 5 yards short of the wide receiver on an easy little hitch route on a soft roll kind of sprint out action. So it's more Davis Warren's team, which leads me to believe even more so after I watched the game and then I watched the game on film. They resemble very much the early Harbaugh Michigan teams. I'm talking about the Jake Rudock team, the Wilton Spate team. I talked about this a lot on Monday, on the Monday show. This is a team that's going to have to develop on offense. This offensive line is going to need to play better. Their two guards did not play well against Fresno State. They played with way too high of leverage. I know I'm getting technical here, but they didn't do great in short yardage. The defensive line for Fresno State got under them. They didn't get double teams that went up to the linebacker, which stifled the run game. But as the game went along, they leaned on that Fresno State defense. And then what happened? They end up popping a drive late in that game, and it was a more sustained Michigan-style drive than what they had previously. Donovan Edwards gets a lot of the run and talk about running back, but I actually think that the most important running back that Michigan has is Kalel Mullings, because when Mullings is in the game, he's the plus runner. See, here's the difference between Donovan Edwards and Kalel Mullings. Mullings is a guy that is always giving you plus yards based on what the play is blocked for. So if it's blocked for 4, he gets you 6. If it's blocked for 2, he gets you 4. If it's blocked for 6, he'll get you 8. Now, here's the difference. Donovan Edwards hits a lot of singles, but he's got home run power. So if it's blocked for 2, he kind of gets 2, maybe 2.5. If it's blocked for 4, he gets you 4. But then all of a sudden, if it's blocked for 8, he gets you 80. So that's the difference, is he's got this home run ability. All of a sudden, it pops out, and we saw that play out last year, I felt like, in spades, in particular late in the season, whether it was Penn State, whether it was the national championship game, whether it was Ohio State 2 years ago in the shoe. You saw those big runs from Donovan Edwards, but what you don't see from him is the Corum style production. Blake Corum was the plus runner that Khalil Mullings is now. So Mullings, to me, is more the Corum of this offense, whereas Edwards gets to continue to play the Edwards role, which was catch it out of the backfield, try to hit a home run. The worrisome part about Michigan's offense is that they have got to find a wide receiver, because right now, after week 1, it was not very good on the outside. They did not have anybody to take the pressure off of their tight end, who is easily their best pass catcher, and that's Colston Loveland, number 18. That secondary for Texas, I think, is improved. It was a weakness a year ago. The biggest question I have is, can you replace those 2 big defensive tackles in the middle? That remains to be seen. And if you're Michigan, you got to feel like we can lean on Texas in the run game. We got to force them to bring safeties down into the box, just like Fresno State was doing. And that all lies on their guards. Josh Preeb, Giovanni El Hadi. Those guys have got to play well and play much better than they did in week 1. Great matchup, folks. This line right now is Texas 7.5. I think it's going to be a close game. Michigan does not get blown out. Their defense does not get blown out. The question becomes, is Texas too physical and too good and too deep and too athletic and too fast to succumb to the boa constrictor? Because that's still what Michigan is. Michigan still wants to philosophically be a boa constrictor. Hanging around, and then bam, they get you. Third quarter, all of a sudden, it's a one-score game. They can blitz all of a sudden with Wink Martindale and get you off the field and then go score. Can they be that guy? We'll see. Without J.J. McCarthy, I think it's going to be very difficult. That was a long breakdown for a game that I'm very excited about. You hear my voice crack there? That's how excited I am. That's how excited I am. All right, let's go on the road now as we kind of bounce through other games. Now, On the Road is going to be sponsored by Hampton by Hilton. When nothing else in life is 100% guaranteed, it matters where you stay. Hilton for the stay. And I tell you, the team that I think has an incredibly tough road environment to deal with this week, which is why it's our On the Road game sponsored by Hampton by Hilton this week, is Colorado at Nebraska. Nebraska favored by 7.5, and here we go, the old rivalry. And think about it this way, folks. I tried to be as unbiased as I possibly could, so I wore as red of a shirt as I could. This is as much as I can do on Colorado-Nebraska week, and it's probably more of a salmon. It's like a soft red, but this is just me trying to just say, okay, analyst hat, I can't be a buff right now. Let's talk about this game, and let's really evaluate how this thing is going to play out. Because you know how I feel about Nebraska. If you've listened to any of the preseason episodes, you'll know that I think Nebraska is a real dark horse, even for the CFP. If they can win on Saturday night at home, they're going to be, undefeated facing Ohio State? I don't think there's any question about that. And even if they lose to Ohio State, they've got UCLA the next week, and now all of a sudden they've got their last 3 games. They're 7-1, and it's like, here we go. What are we going to do at that point? That's why this game is so big for Nebraska. Meanwhile, for Colorado has elite top-level talent, just like I talked about on Monday. And then there were a lot of questions after beating North Dakota State. Now, their defense played a little bit better against the run, in particular in the second half. And I do think that was an upgrade over last year. But we did see a lot of the same mistakes. Unable to run the football effectively, which puts all the pressure on Shedeur Sanders to throw the ball all the time. Throw the ball because he has to, rather than throwing the football and being aggressive because you want to. Those are 2 very different things, and you hear me talk about it all the time. This is going to be a great game. And by the way, this is a game that I was raised on, folks. I was born and raised about 20 minutes south of Boulder. All I wanted to do was, in my whole childhood, was play for the Buffs. Like, that was my childhood. My dad took me to my very first college football game in 1985, and it was Colorado. I watched Ralphie run around, and I was like, that's what I want to do. And guess what? Colorado's main rival throughout all of that was Nebraska. Now, Nebraska bristles at that because they feel like their main rival was Oklahoma, and that, you know what, so be it. I'm just telling you from Colorado's perspective, pointing at Nebraska and making Nebraska their rival was what built Colorado for Bill McCartney in the late 80s, which wound up culminating in a national championship in 1990. This is a huge game for these two programs, and it is a rivalry game. Make no mistake about it. CU has won the last 3 meetings with Nebraska. Go Buffs. I can't. Sorry, that was the last one. That was it. I'm in a soft red. It's a soft red. Okay, that was it. That was the last one. In last year's game, which Gus and I and Jenny called, Nebraska's defense played really well. But it eventually ran out of gas because they were put in bind after bind after bind because of the 4 turnovers from their offense. Nebraska's defense had 8 sacks in last year's game, 7 of them on Shedeur. And I think that largely Matt Rule brings the same style of team back. A lot of those same defenders are back for Nebraska. What Nebraska needed to do, and I've talked about this at length in this offseason and even touched on it with Matt Rule when I talked to him for Big Noon Conversations, was they had to upgrade at quarterback. Not to be great. I don't think they need something special at quarterback. They just needed a net positive. And I went over this again on yesterday's show with Dylan Raiola. If Dylan Raiola can just not turn the ball over, this team is going to be very difficult to beat. And guess what? They've upgraded in some areas around Raiola. In particular, on the outside, Texas transfer Isaiah Nair, 6 catches, 121 yards, and a touchdown in week 1. They got Wake Forest transfer Jamal Banks, 4 catches, 61 yards, and a tutty. Now we're talking, right? So Nebraska's got some players. Remember, they struggled for a long time trying to find wide receivers. They've got some of those. Are they going to be tough enough at the line of scrimmage? You would expect that from Matt Rule. And just remember, as I talked about all offseason, Matt Rule has done this. He has turned things around. He has done this at Temple. He has done this at Baylor, and he will do it at Nebraska as long as he gets net positive quarterback play from Dylan Raiola. Now, on its face, should Nebraska be favored by 7.5? Yes. By everything that you see on film, yes, they're better at the line of scrimmage. I'd say their team is overall better. But here's the pause. The best 2 players on the field will be Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. And if those players just played on offense, I would feel very differently about this. But Travis has the ability to affect the game on both sides of the ball. And if he can be fresh, and if he can be at his best, then guess what? He's the best player, not only on the field, but probably the best non-quarterback in the sport. So Nebraska might be at home and they might be favored by 7.5. What happens if 12 puts a cape on and has 2 picks and goes 6 catches for 150? Because that can happen. Even if Nebraska plays a great game everywhere else, what happens if 12 puts a cape on his back, intercepts the true freshman in his real first game? I mean, like, first time under the lights, first time really getting into it against, like, quality level competition. He's about to look over there and see the best corner in the sport, the best non-quarterback in the sport. What happens if Travis Hunter goes off? That's why I can't get down with the 7.5. That's it. Shedeur Sanders, even when he was sacked 7 times, went off and still beat Nebraska last year. At times, you just have to say, like, the elite talent is going to win out. I do think Colorado's run defense was better last week against North Dakota State, which is nothing to scoff at because that's a team that wants to run the football, and they stopped them in the second half when they needed to. They did a great job of that. Now, if they can be more disciplined, stay away from penalties, create some run game on base downs, on first down and second down, like they did against Nebraska last year. By the way, they ran the ball for about 5 yards a carry in last year's game. Last week, it was not very solid, right around 3 yards per carry. So that needs to get better from week 1 to week 2. If it does, watch out. Colorado has won the last 3. With Shedeur on the field and Travis on the field, I just cannot in good conscience say that those 2 elite players, maybe the best quarterback in the game and the best non-quarterback in the game, are going to get beat by 7.5 in a game that they are clearly going to be circling all off season. I like Colorado in an outright win. I like Colorado 34-31 in an absolute classic in Lincoln. Boise State at Oregon. Oregon, by the way, barely got away from FCS Idaho last week. I mean, barely got away. Maybe you could say like, well, Colorado barely got away from North Dakota State. I think we view North Dakota State and Idaho a little bit differently. I think we view Colorado and Oregon a little bit differently. So when you put that equation together, Oregon narrowly escaped what would have been the biggest upset in college football history, even more so than App State, Michigan back from the early 2000s. They will inevitably play better. Here is where I'm going to pound the table and say, I believe in Dan Lanning. You know what those practices must have been like in Eugene, Oregon? Do you know what that film session must have been like in Eugene, Oregon? If I was Dan Lanning, I would have walked in the team room, slammed the door, even though they're probably soft closed because Phil paid for them. But whatever. I would have tried to slam the soft closed door and just started. First thing I would say is, Dylan had to throw 50 times to beat Idaho? What are we doing? I would have gone off. And inevitably, you know that he did, because there's an old adage in coaching, and I know that even though he's not an old guy, he would definitely have learned this lesson. Dan Lanning is going to know that even though his team won, you treat winners like losers, and you treat losers like winners, because guys that lose need confidence, and guys that win need humility. There was no doubt that Oregon needed a huge dose of humility after last week's win against Idaho. Namely, the group that needed it was the offensive line. We thought that offensive line was going to be something, and guess what? They weren't anything in week 1. 5 of their 8 penalties, offensive line. They averaged under 3 yards per carry against Idaho, and they allowed 3 sacks while giving up 5 all season last year. This is not a Dylan Gabriel, Bo Nix issue either. It's not like Dylan Gabriel was holding the football. The offensive line didn't play well, and they had 3 starters back from last year. They've got to play better. I get it. Jackson Powers Johnson is not there, but hey guys, like, you're Oregon. You're supposed to be in the top 4. You've recruited and built a roster that is on par with the Georgias and Ohio States and Texases of the world. You can't play like that against Idaho. So, with that thought in mind, now you get Boise State into town, and Boise State, what did they do? They showed strength in week 1, and in particular from their running back, Ashton Jeanty. He went off. Jeanty ran for like 1,000,000 yards. Obviously, that wasn't the case. It wasn't 1,000,000, but it was close. 267 and 6 touchdowns. Last time I saw 6 touchdowns, it was Chris Brown running for 6 touchdowns on Nebraska. See you Nebraska week. I had to just throw that in there. 62-36. Dan Lanning, high praise for Ashton Jeanty. I think this is the best running back I've ever seen since I've been here, he says, end quote. He went on to say, quote, he's certainly an NFL guy, and he doesn't go down on first contact ever. He goes on to say, he's one of the best stiff-arm guys that we've ever gone against. He runs really, really physical. That was twofold. One, absolutely true and rightful praise for Jeanty, and it was kind of a shot across the bow to his own team like, hey, buckle up those fancy chin straps. I don't care what uniform we're wearing. It's time to get down, because Boise is undefeated against Oregon in their history. Did you know that? Did anyone else know that? Did I say that yesterday? I probably said that yesterday. Boise is 3-0 against Oregon all time. They won that back-to-back early in the 2000s. They won in 2017 in Las Vegas in a bowl game. Dylan Gabriel was fine. I think they need to run the football better. Oregon does, obviously. And then defensively, they've got to get after it. They have got to get after it. They're favored by 18.5. Guess what? I think Oregon comes out and they are highly motivated. They were just treated like losers for the entire week. I think that they play exceptional football on Saturday, and I actually think that they run Boise out of here. I like 42-17 Oregon Ducks at home. Number 14, Tennessee and North Carolina, State. Neutral site game in Charlotte. By the way, I just got a woo in my ear from our producer who went to Tennessee. Catherine, you're going to love this, because guess why? I love Tennessee all of a sudden. I was highly skeptical coming into this season about Tennessee because we had seen kind of the ebb and flow of 2022 and then 2023. And I thought to myself, I mean, is Nico really going to be that guy that we saw Hendon Hooker be in 22? Are they going to be the number one scoring offense like they were in 22? Or are they going to revert back to what they were last year in 23, which was the 37th ranked scoring offense? I get it. It was against, what was it, Chattanooga? Does it matter? Chattanooga, whatever. I mean, some chat they played. Who knows what they played? But in one half, the guy looked like the real deal. So if, like I said yesterday, if he's that type of guy, they will revert back to 2022 Tennessee, and then all of a sudden they're a contender. Meanwhile, NC State struggled mightily. They were trailing entering the fourth quarter against FCS Western Carolina. I mean, I don't love it. I don't love their matchup. And I really, really like Tennessee. I can't say his name. I don't have it phonetically right in front of me. Ia Maliava. You have to kind of sing it. Ia Maliava. I think that's how you do it. That tip was also from Kat, by the way. Tennessee fan. She said, sing his last name. And Ia Maliava. I think that's right. They've got Squirrel White back. They got Brew McCoy. Heupel's offense, can run the football. Remember, they led the SEC in rushing a year ago. And now you've got Nico Iamaliava. Ava. See, I mean, even when I sing it, I kind of do it wrong. The edge for Tennessee, formidable on defense. James Pierce, that's a good front seven. Tennessee can run it. Dylan Sampson ran it for 133 last year against Iowa, which is nothing to scoff at in the bowl game. And then another 124 last week against Cheddarada. Again, doesn't matter who they were playing. They were really good. I like Tennessee. They're favored by 7.5. It's neutral site. I like Tennessee big. I think Tennessee could get up into the 50-burger range, but let's just tamp it down a little bit. Let's say 45-21. I like Tennessee big. Maybe NC State gets a couple of late touchdowns. I think it could be like a 45-10 game in the fourth quarter. I think Tennessee is really good after what I saw, and I'm a believer. I'm a believer in the Vols. Iowa State at Iowa, the Cyhawk game, 21 Iowa. That's what they're ranked, and they're only favored by 2.5. Why? Because this game is always close. Kirk Ferentz knows it. Everybody knows it. Iowa has won 7 of the last 8, but it hasn't been in dominating fashion. These games are almost always close. In fact, 10 of the last 12 games have been decided by 10 points or less. This is going to be no different. Iowa State's on their way up. I think Iowa is better than they were even a year ago, and this is going to be a really solid game. Now, everyone's talking about like, hey, Tim Lester, the new OC, here we go, 40 points last week from Iowa. It's like, hold on, it was only 6-0 at halftime. Let's just wait and see about the Iowa offense. Now, do they need to be great? Probably not. Why? Because this is going to be a low-scoring game. This is going to be a really low-scoring game. Iowa State's defense is very good, although I do say, like, Iowa State did lose one of their better players on defense last week, their linebacker, Caleb Bacon. He was carted off. He had surgery on his leg. He's out indefinitely. Maybe he could return late in the year. That's what Matt Campbell said, but we'll see. He's definitely out this week. So Cade McNamara and Luke Lachey, here they are. They're feeling themselves. 40 points. 40. That had to feel good for them. I just think it's going to be a lower scoring game. I like Iowa State. Their quarterback, Rocco Becht, he was the Big 12 Offensive Freshman of the Year last year. 3,000 yards, 23 touchdowns, only 8 interceptions. Iowa State's got some good talent. I like Iowa's team. I like their defense. Iowa's defense is just like, they're so good at what they do. Phil Parker, the defensive coordinator, he's not going to let teams get loose. They just keep everybody in front of them. They can present and create pressure on third down, and Kirk Ferentz doesn't lose these games. Iowa is at home. They're favored by 2.5. I like Matt Campbell and Iowa State in the Big 12. I don't love them in this game. I think that Iowa covers in a really low-scoring game. Iowa 14, Iowa State 10. Iowa is favored by 2.5. I think they cover with the 4. Last week I was 5-1, folks. There's my picks this week. Thank you for listening, and enjoy college football week 2. Remember, Big Noon Saturday, live from Michigan as Michigan takes on Texas. Gus, Jenny, and I will be there.